My wife and I just returned from taking our two kids, 11 and 7, on an 11-day Alaskan adventure. And in this next series of videos, I'm going to share with you everything we learned to hopefully help you plan your own great adventure to the land of the midnight sun. During these 11 days, we traveled over 1,200 miles, saw beautiful coastal cities, inland communities, wildlife, sea life, even had hot chocolate at North Pole. So the next series of videos on this channel will be all about Alaska. We'll have excursion tips, eating tips, packing tips. So if going to the state of Alaska is on your bucket list and you have kids to bring along, then this video is for you. Our trip in this video begins in Seward. Seward is a beautiful coastal town located on the Kenai Peninsula in the southern part of the state on Resurrection Bay. Resurrection Bay is actually a fjord of the Kenai Peninsula and a fun way to learn what a fjord actually is. Seward is a roughly 120-mile drive south of Anchorage. You can also get there by train, and it is the southernmost stop of the Alaskan Railroad. This town of about 2,700 people could easily be considered a must-do for any trip to Alaska. We were there for 3 days, and it was the perfect amount of time to experience the city. During this time, we did an all-day kayaking adventure out to Alyeska Bay. You'll still have plenty of time to see the Alaskan Sealife Center, be pulled by sled dogs, and do numerous hikes around the city if that's something you're interested in. Fun fact, one of the dogs that pulled our sled was on the 2017 winning Iditarod race team. In fact, that's him peeing on our buggy right there. Apparently, it just so happens that if you're a sled dog champion, you can pee just about anywhere you want to. But it's time to talk about our first excursion that we did, and that was an all-day kayaking adventure out to Resurrection Bay and seeing the Alyeska Glacier. There are several different tour companies in the town that you can use. We chose Kayak Adventures Worldwide because they were ranked #1 on TripAdvisor, and they did not disappoint. The day starts off with about a 2-hour boat ride and wildlife seeing tour. Throughout the day, we saw bald eagles, seals, sea lions, orca whales, and much more. One of the many highlights of the day was our guide, Sam. He was great with my kids, answered all of their questions. He had a ton of information regarding the landscape around us and the sea life that we saw. Sam was fantastic. Our day started off at 7 in the morning by boarding this small chartered boat. One of the benefits of a small boat like this is it is a much more intimate experience. One of the policies of this company is that every group of 6 or less will have its own individual guide. So if you have a larger group, you can be comfortable knowing that you'll get additional guides to keep it an intimate experience. We were on the boat for only a few minutes when we saw our first round of sea life. One of the first things we saw was this ridiculously cute sea otter who was clearly still waking up for the day. And speaking of the boat, family pro tip #1. Most parents are pretty good about getting their kids to use the bathroom before going on a long excursion, and this is no different, but you don't really have to worry. There is a bathroom on this boat in case nature calls when you just so happen to be looking at nature. One of the benefits of a small chartered vessel over a large company with larger boats and planned itineraries is you have more freedom when you observe wildlife. Here is an example of the boat's captain seeing a lone puffin bird and spending a few minutes circling it, although it really doesn't matter because a few minutes later we literally saw hundreds of them flying around. Inside the boat there is seating for everyone, although considering the environment and beauty, I'm not sure why some people chose to sit inside. However, inside they have coffee and hot chocolate. They also come out during the outbound journey with hot snacks. Once you land on Alyeska Bay, you have a brief safety and kayaking lesson 101. Or what I like to call, how to not kayak like a doofus. And then you head off on your kayaking adventure to Alyeska Glacier. One other tip, when you're choosing partners, make sure you choose a family member that's not going to make you do all of the work. My son here was just straight Jay chillin', enjoying all the beautiful landscapes around him. I'm just kidding, he was doing a lot of work. And here's an unnecessary underwater action camera shot. As you get closer to the glacier, you'll see parts that have fallen off and begin to float past you. You can even pick it up and do whatever you want to with it. It's an interesting experience licking freshwater ice that is floating in a saltwater bay. It's really hard to appreciate the scale of the glacier on camera, but Sam told us that most of this glacier was essentially 40 stories tall. One surprise and really nice touch is once we got there, Sam busted out a thermos and mugs and poured hot chocolate for all of us, and we just sat, drank hot chocolate, and enjoyed the beauty of the surrounding landscape. Another tip and nice thing to know is you can bring whatever you want. Your extra gear that you don't take out kayaking will be safe back on the boat if you choose to leave it behind. After spending time at the glacier, it's time to head back, and once you get back to the beach, they have lunch prepared because it has been already a pretty long day and everybody's worked up an appetite. On the way back is when we saw the sea lions and a large pod of orca whales. It is a full and incredibly fun day. You start at about 7 in the morning and you can expect to get back around 5:30. When we were outside of major cities like Anchorage, we typically stayed in Airbnbs. The great thing about Airbnbs is you get to experience the community and they usually come with amazing views. Another advantage of Airbnbs is you can hit up the local supermarket. This Safeway is located on the main road as you come into Seward. We would try to save money by going to the supermarkets and cooking in as much as possible, specifically breakfast and dinners. We still ate out several times, and I'll have some eating suggestions in just a moment. Another benefit of the Airbnb is at the end of the day, you can wash your clothes, which also decreases the amount of clothes you have to take on your trip. You also have plenty of room to let all your clothes hang out and dry. The next day we started off by going to the Alaskan Sealife Center. This is a very nice aquarium that is AZA certified and you can easily spend a few hours in it. If you plan ahead, you could potentially save a few dollars as they have an interesting pricing scheme as the admission price seems to change based on the day of the week. This is a guaranteed way to observe marine life that is really only native to the state of Alaska. They have harbor seals, large aquariums, and plenty of hands-on exhibits. Unfortunately, the puffin birds exhibit was closed due to the avian influenza outbreak in the lower 48 states, but you can still appreciate them through the glass. Fun fact, their gift shop is open to the public, so if you just want to go in and support the Sealife Center and also pick you up a dope sweatshirt like this, you can do that. They also have pretty cool looking stickers. I'm not saying we got a lot of stickers, but we may have gone overboard a little bit. After some time at the Sealife Center, it was time for some lunch, and I have two specific eating recommendations. We passed a couple of the restaurants that were really close to the Sealife Center and walked up a couple of blocks to the Lone Chicharron. They have really tasty fresh fish tacos and burritos, and it is definitely a recommend. This is located on 4th Avenue, which is nice because it's adjacent to some other gift shops, and there's also a coffee shop close by, which definitely sells some treats that your kids are going to want to partake in. If you're looking for something with a more complete menu, closer to the harbor, they have the Lighthouse Cafe and Bakery. We ate there as well. There's plenty of parking next to the restaurant, although you will have to pay for it. They have a full menu that includes breakfast. It was really delicious and it wasn't that expensive. After lunch, it was time for us to go to our sled dog excursion. We chose the CV's Iditarod Company. You can book your tickets online in advance. They also have a physical booth in downtown Seward if this is a last minute thing for you. I didn't realize this at the time we booked it, but apparently the CV family is a pretty big deal in the Iditarod racing industry, as a member of their family has won this race many times in the past. After everyone in your group arrives, you walk out for a brief history lesson on the Iditarod and a Q&A session. There was around 20 people in our group session, and our family of 4 was placed with another family of 5 for the dog pull. It's about a 2.5-mile trek that the dogs pull you on. Our guide was a member of the CV family and was very knowledgeable and was happy to answer any questions that we had throughout the ride. After the sled ride, they take you to any dog lover's paradise, and that's where they breed the future Iditarod puppies. You get a chance to hold them, play with them briefly, because who doesn't love playing with puppies? That is then followed by going into their shop where you get another presentation with more information about the race. They tell you how it was run, go over the actual sled that is used, and it becomes crystal clear this family truly has a passion for these dogs and the race. The whole experience is about 90 minutes and it was enjoyed by every member of the family. The next day was our scheduled day to leave and go north, so we spent the morning exploring a little bit more of the town around the harbor. As you explore the gift shops and small eateries, you might notice that a lot of places have signs that say no public restrooms. One workaround this is the Kenai Forge Tour Group has a large building central to the harbor. In their gift shop is a restroom that you can go in and you don't have to be a customer. Be warned, however, because walking into this gift shop actually made me want to have another child, because I really wanted to have a reason to buy this stud puffin infant shirt. That thing was awesome. So that was our time in Seward. There were definitely other things you can do, like hiking to Exit Glacier and other nature trails that are around, but it was time for us to head north. You'll notice that some of these travel time lapses are shot in reverse. That's because I realized that mosquitoes are smashing up on the camera lens at a high rate of speed. You can see here the first time I noticed this at the end of the day how many insects were actually crashing into the camera. You can actually see right here the exact moment an insect goes flying into the lens. So to avoid that problem, most of the videos were shot with the camera facing backwards and I'm playing it in reverse. Just an FYI, and RIP Alaskan insects. As we were heading north to Denali National Park, we were going to hit a few common pit stops along the way. The first one is the Alaskan Wildlife and Conservation Center. It is quite unassuming, as from the road it really just looks like open pasture. One of the nice things about this place is, as you're driving by, if some members of your party have fallen asleep, you can stay in your car and drive through the complex and see a majority of the animals, and the people that have fallen asleep don't really need to be disturbed or woken up. Whether or not the Conservation Center is a must-see excursion on your trip is debatable. Just like how the aquarium guarantees that you'll see wildlife that you might not be able to experience, the same thing applies here. While we did see black bear and mountain sheep and goats out in the wild, we certainly didn't see any moose or brown bears, and maybe that was to our benefit. So coming here definitely gives you the chance to go home from your Alaskan adventure saying that you were indeed able to see all of these animals. In addition to larger animals like muskox and grizzly bears and black bears, they have smaller animals too, like red squirrels, owls, and porcupines. Tickets are $18 per person and $14 per child. They do offer personalized experiences and encounters. For example, their website says there's a bear encounter where you can get involved with their daily training and feeding. It's only offered certain days of the week, so be sure and check their website before you go to see what their availability is. They of course have a gift shop where you can go and support the Conservation Center more and get you some neat gifts to go home with. They also have some eating options, but frankly, and this is another tip, the eating options there are contracted out to a third-party service, and I heard many people, my family including, saying it really was not that great. So if you plan on going there and it's going to be a long day for you traveling, you might want to pack a lunch. About 30 miles north of the Conservation Center, and also within a day trip's drive of Anchorage, is the town of Girdwood, where you'll find the Alyeska ski resort. There they have a tram which you and your group can take to the top of the mountain. Quick tip, however, if you were to hike the mountain, you get to ride down on the tram for free, and I did see a lot of people doing that. They just came more prepared that day than we were ready for. According to their website, the tram travels at 26 miles an hour and only takes really a few minutes to get to the top. But once you're at the top, you're at about 2,300 feet and you get amazing views of the town and the Turnagain Arm beneath you. At the top of the mountain, they have a couple of restaurants and some gift shops, so in addition to the views, it's a nice location to stop if you're needing a place to eat on your way north. It's also a decent day's trip from Anchorage if you have a couple of hours to spare. And if you happen to get cold or are visiting in the wintertime, you can warm up by the multiple fires they have around the complex. Now with the Conservation Center and Girdwood behind us, it was time to finish our drive north to Denali National Park. And while Google Maps says the drive is about 7.5 hours, if you factor in stopping for gas and those 2 excursions, you're looking at a 10 or 12 hour day. So in addition to Airbnbs that I mentioned, a yurt can be a great place to stop and break up your trip. It's also a generally fun experience for the night for the kids. We made this yurt reservation on Airbnb as well. Just be careful and make sure that it has running water and a half bathroom if you've got young ones in your group, which is what we did, and this thing worked out great. Had a little kitchenette and all the little things that we would need to have dinner and breakfast. So after spending the night, our next stop heading north towards Denali National Park was the small town of Talkeetna. This is where we were taking our air taxi straight into the mountain range. But at this point we had a few hours to spare, and Talkeetna is a great place to get some lunch or dinner and potentially some souvenirs to take home. And another tip, it's also a very good chance to see Denali before actually getting to the park on a clear weather day if you walk to the end of their main street. But first, my family went to the salmon street vendor and got some chowder and salmon burgers. I went to the fish taco vendor and got some delicious halibut tacos. Afterwards, we walked to the end of the street. At some point it turns into a dirt road, but if you keep going, you're rewarded with the payoff. As I mentioned, on a clear day, you get beautiful views of Denali. Knowing it would be pretty late before we got to the Airbnb that evening after our flight, we stopped in the general store on the main street, so we were able to pick up some groceries that would ensure we would have something to eat, not knowing what the eating situation was going to be when we ultimately got to the Airbnb. Also, the town of Talkeetna apparently has festivals with live music on some Friday night, so if you get lucky and it's going on, pull up a chair and enjoy the environment. Also, it's good to know that the town of Talkeetna has public restrooms, but they kind of look like the setting of the Blair Witch Project. Keep in mind, as it was in Seward, the gift shops in Talkeetna also have bathrooms. Although because these are more mom and pop venues, I'm sure they would prefer you to be a paying customer. Now it was time to fly. We chose Talkeetna Air Taxi because they were rated #1 on TripAdvisor. One pro tip to keep in mind if you're traveling with young ones on this type of excursion, these planes are not pressurized, so it may be beneficial to go ahead and teach your kids how to pop their ears and relieve that pressure should it start to build up. You can of course teach them while they're on the plane, It's just loud in the cockpit and it's a little bit more difficult. Otherwise, my kids thoroughly enjoyed this. The overall experience and the views you are able to see from this trip are indescribably beautiful, so I'm going to let the video do the work for a second. This is the view from the window as we are coming down to land on the glacier inside the mountain range. As you exit the plane, you see that you are surrounded by mountains and the towering Denali in the background. The Talkeetna Air Taxi has several different flight paths you can choose from. Some may be 15 minutes longer or 30 minutes shorter. We chose the Grand Denali tour with glacier landing. Regardless of the time of flight, all of their glacier landings are 30 minutes long, and since that is the clear highlight of the trip, you can't go wrong regardless of what flight path you choose. Once the roughly 30 minutes is up, which is truly a sad moment, everybody gets back on the plane and then you take off on the glacier, fly a little bit more through the mountain range, and then head back to the airstrip. Since it was another few hours before we would finally get to Denali National Park, we decided to grab dinner in Talkeetna before we left. We ended up eating at the Talkeetna Brewing Company, which is a strong recommend. It's a very Americana menu, and they also make their in-house bourbon, and it was good. Now it was time for our final leg to Denali National Park. As you approach Denali, there are going to be several view spots where you can pull off and appreciate the mountain. This is Denali Park South viewpoint, and I encourage you to take advantage of some of these view spots because you never know what the weather is going to be like when you're actually in the national park. If the weather is not perfect, there's a very good chance that you won't be able to see the mountain. And I really haven't mentioned anything yet in the video about the amount of sunlight you get during the day. This is the first week in September, and I can't remember the exact time, but it's about 9 o'clock in the evening, and you can see there is still plenty of light left. During our time at Denali, we would be staying at an Airbnb in the small town of Healy. The nice thing about Healy is it is north of Denali National Park and only about a 2-hour drive from Fairbanks. So if the weather that day in Denali is terrible, you can drive into the city and still do some excursions. And that is exactly what we ended up doing on our first full day in Healy. We drove to Fairbanks, played with some reindeer, and with reindeer on our mind, we drove to the town of North Pole, and why not have a visit with the big man himself, Santa Claus. More on that in a second. So with that being said, let's talk more about reindeer. We booked this excursion with the Running Reindeer Ranch in Fairbanks. We also booked this because according to TripAdvisor, this is the #2 thing to do in the city. At the beginning of the tour, you're greeted by a couple of the ranchers who go over the history of the farm and also give you some interesting information and trivia regarding reindeer. Specifically, do you know what the difference between a reindeer and a caribou is? I'll leave the answer in the description. During this time, they have a little show and tell and they pass around various objects from the farm. For example, right here, they're passing around reindeer antlers, which inevitably lead to the "do these fit on my head" picture. And you may notice that some of the antlers on the live animals look a little bit bloody, and that's because it's the time of year when they begin to shed the velvety coating around the antlers. Don't worry, it's a very normal appearance for this time of year. After the educational session, that's when the walk through the woods begins. The reindeer will walk with you, they'll bob and weave in and out the group, and it's not uncommon for them to walk up right beside you, giving you or a family member the opportunity to pet them. They're really quite friendly creatures. After that, we drove to North Pole. The town of North Pole really embraces its name, where McDonald's signs and street lamps are permanently decorated like candy canes. There are Christmas-themed street names like Santa Claus Lane and Santa Claus Way, but of course their claim to fame is the 40-foot-tall Santa statue, Christmas tree, and Santa Claus house. It is nearly impossible to leave the Santa Claus house without bringing something back to your home for decoration for the holidays. I mean, who doesn't need a Yoda nutcracker? They have a few Halloween things too, but it's mostly Christmas. Even pop culture references like Peanuts and the Gang, The Grinch, and who doesn't want a Harry Potter Christmas? And it goes without saying, but they have everything you could want for more traditional decorations as well. And here at the Santa Claus house, you always know how long it is until Christmas. But no visit could possibly be complete without a visit with the big man and Mrs. Claus himself. You can tell him what you want for Christmas, then go take a look at his workshop, and also sneak a peek at his nice list to see if your name is on it. And then go help yourself to some treats and also some hot chocolate, because what visit to North Pole is complete without a cup of hot chocolate? If you've made it all the way to the inner part of the state to Fairbanks, then I think North Pole is definitely a fun place to stop. If you're not close to North Pole or Fairbanks, is it worth a dedicated trip? Well, that just depends on how festive you're feeling. You really only need about an hour to experience that part of the city. So if it's not too much of a detour from your plans, it's definitely worth it. Now it was time for the next 2 days of our trip, and they were dedicated completely to Denali National Park, rain or shine. Before you turn into the park, you should know there is the strip mall with various stores right outside the park's entrance that might be able to help you plan your day. They have everything from pizza shops, popcorn shops, a massage parlor, to even a Subway. They even have a Chinese food restaurant, and if you're brave enough to eat Chinese before going on a long nature hike, I want to shake your hand. Getting back to the Subway, the idea of getting a sandwich for your backpack before the hike doesn't seem like that bad of an idea. The problem is everyone else going into the park has that idea too. Black Bear Coffee House, which is just a few shops down, also fortunately sells freshly made sandwiches that you can put in your bag, and they will come in really handy in the middle of your hike. Trust me on that one. Skip the Subway and save yourself some time. Now it's time for us to enter into Denali. 2 days was the perfect amount of time for us. But the park is literally the size of Switzerland, so if you're a very outdoorsy family, you can spend your entire vacation inside the park and not do the same trail twice. So the amount of time you spend in the park will be very much dependent on your family's desires. Generally speaking, you can do the park in 2 ways, on your own or using the guided bus tours. The buses are the only way to get past mile marker 15, as that is as far as you're allowed to drive in a commercial vehicle. The good news is they run pretty regularly. More good news is you don't have to get on a bus to find a trail that will allow you views of Denali. This trail, for example, is the Mountain Vista Trail, and its trailhead is at mile marker 13. It's nice, wide, definitely for beginners. I mean, you could probably do this trail in a wheelchair. So after conquering our first trail, we decided to go to the visitor center. It's a really nice exhibit, and I highly recommend it as it has a lot of history and science within the walls. It has numerous interactive exhibits, and the animal replicas are life-size and insanely realistic. On day 2, we did the popular Savage River Trail hike. This is located at mile marker 15 and is as far as you can go inside the park in your own private vehicle without taking a bus further. You should know that parking at the trailhead is extremely limited, and it may actually save you time to get the free bus shuttle that takes you from the entrance to mile marker 15 without having to pay a fee. When you approach the bridge at mile marker 15, you see a sign that says "Do not pass." You actually can cross the bridge as there is additional parking on the other side. It's only about 20 spaces and it fills up just as fast, however. If you cross the bridge and the lot is full, the park rangers will make you turn around and do the drive of shame all the way back to the beginning of the park, where of course you can take the shuttle back to where you started at mile marker 15. The Savage River Trail is also an excellent trail for beginners. The scenery is beautiful, and you never know who or what you might encounter along the way. It's a very simple 1-mile hike out following the river. You cross the bridge and then you come back. As you walk along the trail, you'll come across other smaller trails and rock structures you can climb to make it a little bit more difficult and to get a little bit better of a view if you're interested. The views at the higher elevation are definitely worth it if you're capable. As with everything else we had done on this trip, our kids didn't want to leave, but unfortunately it was time to make our way back to Anchorage for their final days of our vacation. And as great as the experiences at our Airbnbs and yurt were, when we got back to the city, we afforded ourselves some creature comforts and stayed at the downtown Marriott in Anchorage. I can't confirm, but I'm pretty sure there aren't many hotels that are going to have a statue of a grizzly bear in their lobby. The hotel was very clean, the rooms were nice, and it was a real benefit to have a restaurant in the hotel for when we got back late from our days in Anchorage and didn't have to worry about getting food somewhere. So let's talk about Anchorage. As I mentioned earlier, there are some excellent day trips that you can do, like traveling out to Girdwood to the Alyeska resort and riding the tram, or if you didn't have any luck seeing any wildlife while you were in Alaska, you can use this as time to go out to the conservation centers and see any animals that were on your bucket list of seeing. We used our time in the city to go to museums, treat ourselves to some nice restaurants, and get some last-minute souvenirs before we headed back home. Speaking of museums, I was really impressed with the Anchorage Museum. I can see why now they call it just the Anchorage Museum instead of the Anchorage Museum of Modern Art or Natural History and Sciences, as it really has a little bit of everything. There really should be something in this museum that will appeal to everyone in your group. The top floor consisted of a lot of modern art. For example, this exhibit, which uses handcrafted globes depicting various forms of information from all around the world. As you can imagine, a significant portion of the museum is dedicated to Alaskan heritage and native history. My kids really enjoyed the interactive components of the museum, and it was really interesting to see how historically every part of an animal was used efficiently, for example using intestines of marine wildlife to form the outer layers of your coat to stay warm in the brutal winters. Of course, my favorite part was the science exhibit, and it was really fun and interactive. You can make your own volcano, learn about earthquakes, see how high you jump compared to other wildlife. They even had their own moon rock. I had never seen one of those before. Before the science exhibit, I thought the museum was pretty interesting, but after experiencing the science exhibit, the museum is definitely a must-stop for anyone who has a few hours in Anchorage. Another museum we visited was the Alaskan Native Heritage Center. This center shares the heritage and history of Alaskans' 11 major cultural groups. Once you enter, you can decide to do a self-guided tour or a guided tour through the center's mostly outdoor complex. We got there just as the last guided tour of the day had departed, so we did a self-guided tour. And while it was very interesting, I would recommend doing the guided tour as it is included in your admission, mainly because there are a lot of artifacts that are hanging on the wall that don't have a lot of descriptions to them, and we could of course speculate, but not knowing what they were used or how exactly they were used makes me feel like we missed quite a bit of what the museum has to offer. We were still fortunate enough to be able to catch a live dance performance, and the museum does have a cafe if your little ones get hungry. There is of course a gift shop, and the really neat thing about this gift shop is you're going to find things in this shop that you're not going to find anywhere else among the major tourist hotspots on your vacation. My wife was able to pick up a few pieces of artwork and also speak to the artist who made it when she purchased it, so that was pretty neat. At this point, our trip is winding down, but I have two dining recommendations to offer. The first one is the Glacier Brewery. It is a little bit upscale, and without a reservation it can be difficult. We didn't have a reservation, and they told us the wait time was going to be about an hour and 15 minutes. Realizing we didn't know the city and it would take us forever just to find new parking, we decided to take them up on the wait. One nice thing that I discovered is a block up and over from this restaurant is a very affordable Alaskan souvenirs boutique. This is nice for two reasons. You can do some last minute shopping while you're waiting for your table to be ready, and two, being that it's in the middle of the city, it's not located in these touristy hotspots like Talkeetna or Denali National Park, so generally the prices we saw here were a little bit cheaper than they were at these other places. Here at the store you can find hats, stickers, magnets, food, shirts, hoodies, just about anything you need to finish your souvenir shopping for your trip. Fortunately, only 30 minutes into our shopping expedition, we got a notification saying our table was ready. The restaurant was really nice, the waitstaff was very friendly, the food was delicious, and as a bonus, my son got a free dessert because one of his baby teeth fell out while he was eating dinner. The other eating recommendation I have is a restaurant called The Rustic Goat. This is considerably cheaper, but came still highly recommended by locals. If you're not lucky enough to get outside seating, don't worry, because their inside seating, especially upstairs, give you really picturesque views of the mountain range adjacent to Anchorage. This was a nice and low-key restaurant for us to eat at after a long day of museum hopping in Anchorage. And with great sadness, that would now conclude our 11 days in Alaska. As you can see from what I mentioned at the beginning, when we rented our car at the beginning it had 10,400 miles on it. And at the very end, when we turned it into the airport, it had 11,725 miles. Over the course of 11 days, you can see we traveled over 1,300 miles of great Alaskan adventure. So that's part one of our video series on Alaska. I hope it gives you an idea of some of the things you can do and at least one way of how you can go about doing them all. Part two of the video will be how we prepared the family, things we packed on our trip, things that we didn't really need to pack, things that we wish we had have packed, and of course part three will come after that. I really hope you get some benefits from these videos for your planning. I'll see you on the next video.